New videos about the history of college football and the history of baseball dropping soon on Jaguar Gator 8 and Jaguar Gator 7. Make sure to click the link in the description so you don't miss any of the action. And now, on with our feature presentation. The Indianapolis Colts might be one of the most storied franchises in the NFL when you think about it. They have produced countless numbers of Hall of Famers, from the likes of Peyton Manning and Johnny Unitas to the likes of Art Donovan and Raymond Berry. They've won 2 Super Bowls, winning Super Bowl V during the 1970 season and Super Bowl 41 during the 2006 season, and they made it to 2 more. They've won 4 titles if you count their 1958 and 1959 wins in the NFL Championship, with the 1958 game being one of the most important games in the history of the National Football League. And they've had tons of success, making it to the playoffs 29 times as of this video, which is the 7th most in NFL history. It's hard to imagine an NFL without the Colts, whether they are in Baltimore or in Indianapolis, as they've been a part of so many iconic moments in the NFL and have such a storied and rich history. However, what's somewhat odd about this is that when you think of the Colts fandom, despite their long and rich history, they don't have anything defining. The Pittsburgh Steelers have the terrible towels, the Green Bay Packers have their cheeseheads, and heck, even the Jacksonville Jaguars have their Duval chant. Most of the teams have something defining about their fandom, whether it's a chant, or an object, or something along those lines. And quite simply, the Colts do not have that. However, that's not to say that they didn't try. Their attempt to get a signature chant and that signature object to define their fandom was, well, an attempt. A really stupid attempt at that, but an attempt nonetheless. Which raises the question, just how stupid was it? Well, it involved the NFL and stadium officials stepping in and outlawing the thing because it was illegal, and then involved a second attempt that the Colts tried to get off of the ground, but was about as successful as watching Curtis Painter play quarterback. And trust me, if you ever watched Curtis Painter play quarterback, that is not a compliment in the slightest bit. Because during the 1999 season, and prior to their divisional round game against the Tennessee Titans, the Indianapolis Colts tried to establish some sort of culture and some sort of unique and identifying characteristic, which went horribly and laughably wrong. And this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances and considering how funny it is, the most embarrassing moment in the history of the Indianapolis Colts franchise. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, because trust me, it's insane, we need some context to understand why the Colts even wanted something like this in the first place, where they wanted some sort of fan chant and defining characteristic. The year is 1999, and the Indianapolis Colts are having, quite possibly, their best season ever since moving from Baltimore. After back-to-back years boasting a 3-13 record, the Colts, against all odds, had one of the greatest single-season turnarounds in NFL history, going from 3-13 in 1997 and 3-13 in 1998 to 13-3 in 1999. Yep, the wins and losses flipped. Obviously, a big reason for that was the play of their second-year quarterback, who you may have heard of before, named Peyton Manning. Seeing as in just his second year in the league, he was already one of the best quarterbacks in the sport, and probably had an argument for being the best quarterback in football in 1999 outside of Kurt Warner, throwing the 3rd most touchdown passes in the league with 26, and throwing the 3rd most yards in the league with 4,135. It was obvious in 1998 that the Colts made the right decision choosing Peyton Manning over Ryan Leaf with the number 1 pick. But in 1999, any shred of debate whatsoever was fully gone after he got the Colts to the 3rd best offense in the league. Indy actually didn't start the season all that great, going 2-2, but won 11 of their final 12 games to make it into the playoffs as the hottest team in football and finish with their 13-3 record. with the lone loss being in Week 17 against the Buffalo Bills in a completely meaningless game where the backups played in the second half. Oddly enough, I talked about that game before, so if you want to learn more about how that game turned out, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And this 13-3 record was historic for a few reasons. Number one, it gave the Colts their most regular season wins in a season, tying the record that they had in 1968 when they went 13-1 and made it to the Super Bowl. You can learn more about that 1968 Colts team by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Number two, it gave the Colts the AFC East title, which was the first time they won the division since 1987. And number three, and most importantly, not only did it give them a bye into the divisional round, but it gave them their first home playoff game since Ghost to the Post back in the 1977 divisional against the Oakland Raiders that went into double overtime. However, that game was when they were the Baltimore Colts, more than 2 decades ago. This meant that their 1999 divisional round game, which would be against the Tennessee Titans on January 16, 2000, would be the first time ever that the Colts were hosting a playoff game in Indianapolis. After over a decade and a half of waiting, fans in Indiana could watch January football and watch one extra game at the RCA Dome. Colts fever was absolutely buzzing around this time, and the hype for this playoff game, which may have been the biggest in team history at the time since moving to Indianapolis, excluding the 1995 AFC Championship against the Pittsburgh Steelers, was real. Now, it was time to capitalize. It was time to get that home field advantage, or dome field advantage, as some like to call it, and show the world what Colts fans were made of. Which is why once it became official that the Colts would be hosting a playoff game, the team knew that they needed to get some sort of defining chant or celebration, or something to set them apart from other fan bases. With that, the team and the local newspaper, the Indianapolis Star, solicited ideas from people to vote on. Alright, we're off to a good start if we're forcing the issue, seeing as a lot of the chants and defining objects that became known for teams were organically created. It's not as though the Packers ran a poll saying, "What should our fan base wear on our heads?" However, when the poll was run, there was an overwhelming winner in terms of what the official chant and object of the team would be, making its grand debut during the playoff game against the Titans to make the RCA Dome the loudest that it's ever been. That item? Well, that was a little something called the Colts can. How the Colts can worked was like this. Fans would have cans with them, whether they would bring them into the stadium or buy them at the stadium. These cans would contain unpopped popcorn, meaning that the cans contain nothing but popcorn kernels. Why popcorn, you may ask? Well, corn is one of the main things that Indiana is known for. Roughly half of the cropland in Indiana, according to sources, is devoted strictly for corn. In 2020, for instance, Indiana produced over 981 million bushels of corn, meaning that 7% of all of the corn in the United States was produced in Indiana. Indiana, as a state, is 36,420 square miles, meaning that for every square mile, nearly 27,000 bushels of corn were grown, making Indiana one of the top states in the country from a bushels to square miles perspective. Anyways, agricultural sense of why the Colts can made sense aside, fans would, quite simply, shake that can of corn. It's that simple. You shake the can, and with the kernels bouncing around the can, it makes a loud noise. Now, and nearly 60,000 people in the RCA Dome shaking that can, and you've got an insanely loud environment where no opposing offense can thrive in, seeing as it would be impossible to hear anything. I mean, on the surface, it's not a bad idea. If we just isolate that, it's a pretty good idea. Mississippi State has their cowbells to artificially increase the noise, and the Indianapolis Colts would have their Colts can. It's a simple enough act it makes noise, it's easy to get. And when I say that it was the runaway favorite when market research was conducted, I truly mean it was the runaway favorite. Because out of all the votes for the way for Colts fans to show their spirit in a unique way, the Colts can won with 86% of the vote. Do you realize how hard it is for anything to win with 86% of a vote? The people overwhelmingly spoke, and they said that the Colts can in fact be the official spirit thing of the team. We're going to bring our cans full of corn into the stadium. We're going to shake them like there's no tomorrow. We're going to show the world who we are, and we're going to create the loudest environment possible. However, if you think about the Colts can for more than 5 seconds, there are a few problems with it. Because yes, you can shake a can, but what else can you do with a can? There's 2 things in particular that come to mind that should draw red flags right away. The first is that you can sneak stuff in it. Now, oddly enough, this was never brought up as a concern by the NFL and by the officials at the RCA Dome. Maybe because they never thought that this was a possibility, since this was a pre-9/11 world. But this was the first thing that I thought of. In theory, the idea behind the Colts can is that people fill their can with popcorn kernels. In actuality, though, you can fill that can with a bunch of other things. You could put a knife in the can. You can put a firework in the can. You can put a hand grenade in the can. I'm just saying, there's a lot of things that you can put in a can that are not kernels that would not be detected by security unless they physically opened and checked every single can, which would be an absolute nightmare. Plus, how big can the can be? And how on earth are you going to enforce that? It just opens up, pun completely intended, a giant can of worms. But the other thing with the Colts can, and the main concern that officials and the NFL had with this when word was getting out that the Colts were going to do the Colts can, is that the other thing that you can do with a can besides shake it is throw it. You can absolutely use a can as a projectile and launch that bad boy as hard and as far as you can. I mean, we were 2 years away from Bottlegate, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And bottles aren't even the easiest thing to throw, since the shape is inconsistent throughout, and they can be a bit slippery. Now, imagine chucking a can, and not an empty can, but rather a can full of stuff inside, where throwing it is like throwing a baseball. Yeah, that's a major problem, because you can imagine that if there's one bad call, or one highly controversial thing that happens, that cans are going to start flying everywhere, and someone could get hit. Because despite nearly 87% of the public vote, Colts officials, probably after they spoke with the NFL and their liability insurance providers, and they were vehemently against it, had a change of heart. Said Ray Compton, the Colts executive director of business development, "There's always a concern when the public brings in an item that could be used as a missile." And as Pat Early, the president of the Capital Improvement Board, which was the group in charge of the RCA Dome, said on all of this, you might say, gosh, that's ridiculous. But you know it can happen. Put that many cans of popcorn in that many hands, and if somebody isn't happy, people are pretty swept up in this whole thing. So with that, the Colts can was quashed. Good try, but if you want an official cheer, you're going to have to go back to the drawing board and come up with something else. Alright, we weren't trying to come up with a chant or a spirit identifier organically. And now, it's about to get even more inorganic as we try this again, where you could come up with anything you want besides the Colts can. And folks, if you thought this story couldn't get even more ridiculous than it was, then think again. Because what do you think Colts fans came up with? Something where you mimic the sounds of a stampede? The Colt cloth? As in, a signature blue cloth that you wave like a terrible towel? some sort of chant that sounds like a horse. All of these things sound like they'd be logical options for a last-minute alternative. But nope. Because, folks, the chant that the Colts agreed upon to become the official signature gesture of the team was something called, I kid you not, the air lasso. How the air lasso works is like this. It's as simple as it sounds. You move your dominant arm in a circular motion above your head, and then you yell, Yahoo! I swear I am not making this up. The official cheer of the Colts, that was going to be their Duval, or their Who Dey, or their Who Dat, or their Incomplete, was to wave your arm in the air like you were trying to lasso up an animal trying to get away, all while yelling, Yahoo! And if you would like me to demonstrate just how stupid and how ridiculous this is, because I feel kind of obliged to do this just to illustrate the point even further, let me show you.
Yahoo! 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 Yeah, I'm not really sure why this didn't catch on.
Now, unlike the Colts can, this didn't pose a problem with the NFL or with stadium officials. As Ray Compton said, I like it. Everybody could do it, and it wouldn't cause the liability insurance to go up. Maybe that's something to do when we're on defense. And Myra Borshoff, a spokeswoman for the team, echoed those thoughts, saying on the air lasso being the official cheer of the team, it's a nice, serendipitous thing. However, let's think about this for more than 5 seconds about why this is ridiculous, other than the clip I just showed of me completely embarrassing myself. Number one, no, it's not a projectile. But do you realize how hard it is for drunk people to be fully coordinated as it is? Heck, it's hard for sober people to be coordinated. There have been a few times in my life where I'm at a game completely sober. Something exciting happens, and I throw my fist in the air, and I almost take someone's head off because it's a heat-of-the-moment thing, and I'm putting my fist in the air straight up. Now you're asking fans to do that, but not just throw their fists in the air, but rather make a circular motion with them on top of it, increasing their radius of movement, and thereby increasing the chances for collisions with other people? Yeah, not sure how that's gonna work. Exaggerate it too much so that you make it look like a lasso, and you put other fans in significant danger. Don't exaggerate it enough, and it makes it look like you're just like every other fan. Number two, is it just me? Or does this chant have me feeling like a cowboy? And that's a problem when not only is your team named the Colts, but when there's another team in the NFL that's freaking named the Cowboys. Between the lassoing and the yeehawing, this chant feels like it would work better for the Dallas Cowboys. It would almost be like if I created a chant in the NBA for the Charlotte Bobcats, where I howl at the moon. Even though there's a team named the Minnesota Timberwolves, that this would feel a lot more appropriate for. Now, I am in no way suggesting that the Cowboys adopt this absolutely hideous chant, but it works way better for them than it does for the Colts. Number three, if they wanted you to do this while on defense, isn't this actually less effective from a crowd noise perspective than just screaming and being loud? Clapping your hands together and screaming produces way more of a home field advantage from a noise perspective than saying yeehaw, having to take breaths, and lassoing. So good job, Colts. You created a chant that actually goes against you. And number four, you can't just force something like this. Holy organic Batman. Look, the Colts can, for all its many flaws, at least had an overwhelming response. But before the Colts adopted the air lasso as their official chant, and nixed the Colts can, you know how many people voted in favor of the air lasso? A whopping 323 people. Seriously. It registered barely 3% of the vote that the team and the newspaper put out. In fact, there were Colts fans out there that hated the air lasso, that refused to do it, and thought that it looked ridiculous and made the city and the team look bad. said Ben Gardner, an Evansville resident who was a big proponent of the Colts can, "It's more hillbilly-ish to wave a fake lasso in the air and yell Yahoo." And yeah, I can't disagree with him there. On so many levels, this just did not work at all. And there's a reason why not only very few, if any, Colts fans did this during the divisional round game, even though this was the team's official cheer, but why the air lasso did not survive afterwards. As today, Colts fans will do anything to hype up their team but air lasso. It also didn't help that the Colts ended up losing this playoff game to the Titans, dropping a heartbreaker by a final score of 19-16, meaning that on this day, when it came to both the team's season and the air lasso, the Colts yeed their last haw. But a part of me absolutely wants to see the Colts try this again and make a second push to make the air lasso the official cheer. I mean, there's no better time than right now, right? The NFL's bringing back throwback uniforms and dipping into that nostalgia. Not that I think anyone has nostalgia for the freaking air lasso, but you never know. The biggest show in the country was Ted Lasso, so it's clear that people are yearning for the lassos. Having said that, this is what happens when you try to create fan culture in a completely rushed, inorganic, and inauthentic way, and then dictate what can and cannot be done, even though I completely understand why the Colts had to can the Colts can. Will the Colts ever have a defining cheering characteristic of their own from a fandom perspective? Who's to say? Duval didn't become a thing with the Jags until 2017. The Cheeseheads didn't become a thing with the Packers until the late 80s, and the Terrible Towel didn't become a thing until the mid-70s. For years, those teams had nothing, and now, it's hard to imagine the fandom of those teams without it. So the Colts might have something down the line, whether it's in 5 years or 50 years. But whatever it eventually is, I'm pretty confident that it will not be the air lasso. Because when Colts fans made their opinions known about their own official cheer, it was not a yay, but rather a resounding nay. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.